Hello, everyone. So if any picture is worth 1,000 words, this one is. So I created this image as it epitomises natural pest control for me, which is a dynamic, active system diffusing pest eruptions. So this took me quite a long time to make, so I show it to as many people as possible, so my time wasn't wasted. So today I'm going to take you on a little journey through my PhD, which examined the natural pest control provided by bats in cotton production zones. So we're going to go through why natural pest control is important, bats in general, where bats forage in cotton crops, and what they eat in Australian cotton growing areas. And then we're going to look at calculations on economic value and impact on insects and yield. So I'm first going to delve into why natural pest control is important. I'm going to make these ones kind of brief as I can. So in today's times, we've got increased global demand for more sustainable farm practices and reduced pesticide use. We know that it's important to maintain biodiversity and ecological function in agroecosystems for other ecosystem services such as pollination, soil retention, shade for stock. We also know that it creates farm resilience by reducing reliance on a single pest control method, and different pests require different management. So different pests cause different problems. They require a suite of control methods to manage them. And we also want to reduce pesticide use. So we know they're bad for the environment, toxic, and can harm non-target organisms. So as a result of these factors, there's an increased interest in natural methods of pest control, for instance, including birds and bats alongside beneficial arthropods in integrated pest control programs on farms. However, creating and improving or maintaining habitat for natural predators kind of means nothing if we can't communicate the economic importance of natural predators in terms of cost savings to growers. So here's a situation for crop losses currently as a result of pests and diseases. So 20 to 40% of crop yield globally is lost to animal pests and diseases. 50 to 80% of global crop loss due to arthropod pests, which about 50% of this loss occurs in wheat, to more than 80% in cotton production zones. Just have to mute that so I can read my slide. So 8 to 15% of crop yield is lost to animal pests, mainly arthropods. And further crop losses are projected with climate change. So specifically, yield loss to insects for the three most important grain crops, which are maize, rice and wheat, will increase by 10 to 25% per degree per Celsius of warming. And I don't have stats for cotton here, but I imagine it would be something fairly similar. So as a result of these statistics, in addition to the points I mentioned on the previous slide, natural pest control is an integral part of farm management for the future. Yet if you look through any IPM guideline for any Australian crop, there are no methods or quantifiable strategies or thresholds for the natural pest control service provided by vertebrates, specifically birds or bats. Now, if you look in the cotton IPM guidelines, it's mentioned that they're good. You can put up a roosting box, that's nice, but it doesn't say anything about how many bats you need to suppress certain insects or how you can encourage more bats specifically. So, but we've known that bats can suppress insects on farms for over 100 years. Can you believe that? And here are some of the examples of bat houses on agricultural farms to encourage colonies. And the oldest one in the middle was constructed in 1907. Here are some examples now of studies worldwide on the impact of birds and bats to agriculture. So we know several studies have shown birds and bats eat insects, pests, in a variety of crops, and they're directly linked to leaf herbivory, to reduced leaf herbivory and increased yields. So the Brazilian free-tailed bat, which is a well-studied bat in the US, in the Texas cotton growing area. They save 20% of the total annual cotton crop revenue by direct predation of pests. Similarly, in Costa Rica, insect pest control provided by birds in coffee plantations prevents $12 to $50 damage per hectare per year. And insect intraguild predation have been estimated to account for at least 50% of pest control occurring in a crop field. And this is valued at $13 billion per year in the US alone. Now, global estimates for bird predation indicate that they suppress 20 to 70% of the insect population in crops. So I needed to find a research gap for the work with birds and bats in cotton. And this is normally the research gap that we work with, a really tiny small one, but I managed to find a huge research gap. So there are actually few studies, of which all were unpublished, in Australia that quantify any kind of pest control service provided by bats. And this is probably why there's nothing in IPM guidelines, because how can you create a guideline for something you know nothing about? And pretty much all of the research on Australian farms, including cotton, has previously focused on the provision of pest control provided by beneficial invertebrates. So let's turn our attention to bats, my favourite part. There are about 103 species and subspecies of bat in Australia, 34 in New South Wales, and insectivorous bats eat insects, and they eat a lot of insects. They eat about 1/3 of their body weight in insects each night, with lactating females and other energetically important times of the year. They can eat almost their entire body weight in insects, so 70 to 100% of their body weight in insects each night. And so what they do is, I'm just going to play that, they navigate and catch prey by echolocation. So they catch the prey either during flight, gleaning off a surface like this, or sometimes they land on the ground. And echolocation, if you're not sure, it's just very similar as submarine sonar and dolphins. So bats emit a sound through their mouth or nose. The sound travels through the air, it bounces off an object, and the bat interprets these echoes. And so that's how they see the world. It's like distance over time, and bats are not blind either. Another important thing about bats is they roost in a variety of places. We've got tree-dwelling bats, so they roost in hollows, cracks, fissures of trees, bats that roost in man-made structures, so houses, buildings, sheds, the drain pipe of something, fence posts. They also roost in bridges, culverts, and caves. And much of the previous research on bats in crops has focused on colonies of millions of bats descending on crops, depleting eruptions of moths in one night. And that's in the Winter Garden region of Texas. Now, we don't have any large colonies of cave-dwelling bats near cotton-growing regions. And this is a really important point to make in the beginning, because bats foraging over Australian cotton crops comprise a community of mixed species of bat that are generally not colony forming. They're tree-dwelling species. They roost singly or in small groups. Okay, so we're talking a lot of different species roosting singly, not a million mass coming into the cotton crops. One more really important point about bats, and this is kind of the crux of the research, is that habitat use by bats is highly correlated to echolocation frequency, which is then related to prey choice, so what they eat, and wing morphology, which determines where they fly in cluttered or not cluttered environments, which I'll talk about now. So different species of bat are adapted to different habitats and different degrees of clutter, like forests with lots of leaves versus open spaces like crops. Now, for example, slow flying bats generally have short and broad wings up the top, the Nyctophilus, we have those in cotton, and they use higher frequency echolocation calls that covers a broad frequency bandwidth, kind of like this. sweeping the landscape horizontally, and they get a really good image of what is immediately in front of them. But these calls are soft and they don't travel far. So whilst they get a lot of information in forest systems, this kind of echolocation is fairly useless for open spaces because they can't detect prey, they're exposed, they can't fly fast, they can't see where they're going. This is important in terms of natural pest control because whilst one species might eat Helicoverpa moths, they won't eat small Hemiptera because they simply can't detect them or see them. And my point here is that different bat species eat different pests and not all can forage over crops because of the open space. But we sure can encourage them to do so. So now to my PhD, finally to some results. I wanted to know what bats were eating in cotton. Were they eating pests or beneficial insects? And the first thing I did was collect scat samples from bats captured flying over cotton crops. In the droppings, I matched 728 unique prey species to the DNA database. We found that bats eat more pests than beneficials. In fact, 94 of these unique prey were pest species, and they had an average pest volume, so the volume in the prey of 65% versus 1% for beneficial volume, respectively per sample. So we also detected 19 specific cotton pests, and crazily, despite Bt cotton, the Helicoverpa genus was detected in 86% of scat samples. And this is just a visual to show you an overview of those results, basically. Furthermore, we found that insectivorous bats consumed a few unique species and many species only once. And this supports evidence that bats exploit preferred locally abundant taxa, such as large eruptions of moths. But they also will consume a wide selection of available prey just because they can. So in this figure, I look at the volume. So the graph on the top left is the relative abundance, which is basically volume of insects by order in the bat scat sample. On the right is the frequency, so the richness of occurrence of each order in the bat sample. And down the bottom are the insects that are recorded in the light traps. So what I wanted to do was compare what was in their diet versus what's available in the landscape. And whilst you might not be able to see the change in this graph, it shows that bats appear to source their favourite prey, whether it's available in the landscape or not. And for example, after cotton defoliation, bats appear to eat more types of beetles. So they eat more beetles, so the richness increases of beetles, probably because there are less moths in the crop. But the volume of moths in the diet stay the same. So it kind of means they must be sourcing them from elsewhere in the landscape when there's not as many moths in the crop. So that's interesting. Next, I wanted to look at where bats were moving through the landscape. And this part's not actually published yet, but here we can see that bats are flying at least 250 metres inside a cotton crop from the crop edge. But obviously there's more activity in the remnant habitat, which is generally riverine habitat in the cotton zones. So I'll talk about this again a little bit later. So now that I know that bats are flying into the centre of crops, I wanted to know how bat activity right in the middle of crops was related to woody vegetation in the surrounding landscape, prey abundance, distance to the crop edge, size of the field, proximity to water bodies. So water matters a lot to bats. They generally need to drink every night. And moon illumination. So to better understand how insectivorous bats and bat diversity, foraging in the crop interiors, how all that was dependent on those factors. That's just an example there. So what I found was that bats are foraging in crop interiors, and it was positively related to bug abundance, moth abundance, and woody vegetation within 5 kilometres of the crop. The graph on the right shows that bat foraging increased with hemiptera abundance on moonlit nights over 75% illumination. And this is really interesting because only lately have we discovered that bats do forage in full moonlight, so they don't just try to skirt under darkness all the time. We also found that bat foraging was 3 times greater in mature cotton crop interiors than young cotton. So obviously the mature cotton, the foliage facilitates movement, so echolocation, they can see where they're going inside a crop, where young cotton doesn't. We've got increased cotton foliage height and density was associated with bat diversity in crop interiors. And this is related to better habitat, again, suiting a variety of echolocating bats. So the open space bats can come in, the edge space bats can come in, and those forest clutter dependent bats can come in. So the bat assemblage in cotton crop interiors, so the richness and diversity, was positively related to woody vegetation foliage cover within 5 to 10 kilometres of the crop, as well as Lepidoptera and Hymenoptera abundance. So what this means is whilst woody vegetation within 5 kilometres of the crop is important to encourage bats to forage and eat insects in the crop, if you want diversity of species, then woody vegetation within 5 to 10 kilometres matters more. So with the management implications of this, we've got, as I said, bat roosting habitat, i.e. trees that have hollows, exfoliating bark or something, are necessary within 5 kilometres of the crop to increase bat activity or foraging. Bat diversity and insect suppression of a variety of crop pests would likely benefit from the management of roosting habitat within 10 kilometre radius of cotton crops. And moreover, modifying crop configurations to increase edge habitat would facilitate increased diversity and foraging activity of insectivorous bats in crops. And the other cool thing about this is we recommend that growers try to time insecticide sprays for sucking bugs on low moonlit nights in order to reduce the impacts upon bats and maximise the natural pest control. So next up is estimations and calculations. So the next step was using this data that I'd collected over the last few years, I say 7 years, on bats in cotton, in an attempt to estimate how much they are eating and what they're doing, and then seeing if I could put a value on this. So what I did was I used a combination of bat dietary studies, average daily energy requirements. So I estimated this using field metabolic rate. So this is metabolic rate plus bats fly, so they need extra energy. Prey energy content, so the calories of insects consumed. And acoustic data, so the sound recordings of bats feeding in cotton. So we record the echolocation and you can see if they're feeding or not. So now I used, I used acoustic data from the Centre of Cotton Crops, and that's a conservative estimate, right? So if you think back to my previous slide where I had activity from the remnant edge 50 to 150 metres in the crop, we know that there's heaps more bat activity at the edge. So I focused on the centre because I wanted this estimate to be conservative. So what we came up with is we estimate that bats are responsible for 48 to 60 foraging attempts, so that's 31 to 39 successful insect captures per hectare over cotton crops. So bats don't always successfully catch prey and have a greater success with some insects. Some people think that aerial bats, so the ones that catch insects mid-flight, have a greater success rate, close to 100. Some estimate 65% capture success for small prey, 92% for mosquitoes, and 35% success for larger insects. So we actually based ours, well, and depending on the insect grouping, for moths, it was 35% capture rate. So yeah, it's a pretty conservative estimate. So Extrapolated over the Eastern Australian cotton growing region, this equates to 9.4 to 11.9 million foraging attempts in cotton crops, removing about 6.1 to 7.7 million insects per night. And that's assuming a 65% capture success. So given that around 92% of bat diets in this region are comprised of moths, this equates to about 3 to 3.9 million moths. Hang on, there we go. 3 to 3.9 million moths, or 0.48 to 0.61 tonnes of moths removed from cotton crops nightly across Eastern Australia. So what we're going to look at now is the avoided cost provided by the Gould's wattled bat. He was a really common bat that we recorded in cotton. He's a generalist, he's everywhere. And this is via the direct predation of Helicoverpa in cotton. So we know that to maintain homeostasis, so that fulfill their FMR, their field metabolic rate, based on the known diet breakdown in my previous studies of DNA, this bat needs to consume 17 large moths or 69 small moths, 276 staphylinid-sized beetles, 3 flies, 9 bugs, and 1 cricket every night. So this avoided cost approach uses either the value of the property protected or the cost of actions taken to avoid damages as a measure of the benefits provided. So we just did the cost avoided by him eating Helicoverpa. So the bats fly over the crop and they eat the moths, which don't eat the cotton, but they prevent the consumed moth from laying eggs, which hatch into caterpillars, which do eat the cotton. So in the absence of bats, the farmers harvest less crops. So we know that this bat, Canolobus gouldi, can eat 17 large moths each night, and we know they're eating Helicoverpa amigera. So assuming an equal sex ratio of Helicoverpa amigera, if half of the moths consumed by this bat are Helicoverpa, that's about 8, and are female, reduces your number to 4, and half of these females used BT cotton to oviposition, then based on these calculations, one bat consumes 2 reproductive Helicoverpa moths each night. And this would prevent around 1,610 eggs being laid, or 7 4th to 6th instar caterpillars, damaging 7.8 cotton bolls each. This is equal to a direct saving of $2 to $2.70 per hectare per night per bat. And based on the 2014-15 bale prices and the yield of dryland and irrigated BT cotton, they're worth about, where will we go here? $286 to $361 per hectare in irrigated BT cotton. And did I do dryland? No, dryland's up there, great. And this is, oops, go back. This is equal to about $64 million, or the range was 56 to 71 million annually to the Australian cotton industry. And this is 4.9% of the annual farm gate value. So my results give insight into the activity of bats and possible ways we could include them in IPM. So with careful management of the crop and non-crop habitat, we can enhance bat habitat within 5 kilometres of a crop, because we know that enhancing habitat for natural predators can assist in pest suppression, particularly during pest outbreaks, because they target moths. We can time sprays, hemiptera sprays to low moonlit nights. We could consider crop configuration for bat biocontrol, more bat activity near edges at around the 50-metre mark. So why not promote long linear crop configuration of 50-metre distances? Increased bat functional diversity improves the efficacy of natural pest control. So ensuring we've got vertical stratification of habitat in the crop, outside of the crop, wherever you can manage it, that will improve diversity, which will improve the functional diversity of bats, which improves the suite of insects that can be controlled. And also, so pest control methods are a bit farm specific too. So again, you need the certain habitat, and what works on one farm may not work on the other. So hopefully these results can provide further incentive for growers to manage non-crop bat roosting habitat to benefit natural pest control in crops. And here's some pictures of my lovelies. These guys were caught on Andrew Watson's farm in Boggabri. And thanks to these people for helping me through life. Thanks.